Eyes on. Roger.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Eyes On. Almost a full crew here. We have Mick Mulroy, Jason Lyons, and myself, Andy Milburn. It's out and about. Um, Kind of a busy week going on. A lot happening between Ukraine and Russia and a potential talks for a potential peace deal. You had the Secretary of Defense and the Vice President in Europe. Was it a NATO? It was a Brussels in Brussels, right? And
So you had the Munich Security Conference, and then you had the NATO sync in Brussels.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, as we're recording right now at 12 p.m. Eastern, Zelensky was doing a press conference and was asked if he was invited to the U.S.-Russia meeting in Saudi Arabia, or the potential meeting to discuss parameters of a peace talk. And Ukraine said that they were not. Zelensky said that Ukraine was not invited, which I think is probably not great. Mick, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, first of all, greetings from the snowy mountains of Montana, where it snowed, I think, for the last 2 days straight. So there's a lot of backs being thrown out across the great state, I tell you. So, I mean, to back up a bit, if you really look at it, and you haven't heard General Kellogg's name a lot in this, although he's in all these meetings, and he's the special envoy to carry out this effort to end the fighting in Ukraine, which I think everybody would agree would be a good thing. His plan is reasonable, I think. It is, and it's reasonable for the Ukrainians. It is essentially a pause in the fighting, a demilitarized zone that's monitored by NATO forces, European forces. It does essentially freeze the conflict. It doesn't require Ukraine to cede any of its territory politically. It just recognizes that it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for them to take it back militarily, but they certainly could pursue that, and the international community should have never recognized any of that territory taken by Russia as theirs, including Crimea. And it does give the Ukrainians a chance to refit and rearm, and essentially us to move in a lot of air and missile defense to build up their capabilities to recruit more fighters and provide some kind of security assistance, which is what the big issue is when it comes to NATO membership. So from my perspective, as long as that's still what they're talking about, and it's good for Ukraine, and more important than me, President Zelensky has shown an interest in it for a reason. I think he realizes that would be a good thing if it's agreed to by Russia, and that's the big if, right? Russia has showed no interest in it so far, and I think some of the criticism that came out because of Secretary Hegseth's comments on, there's two main comments that got criticism. One, that at the end of this negotiated settlement, there wouldn't be a Ukraine in NATO. Okay, I think Ukraine should be in NATO eventually. But I also think it's just pointing out the obvious that if it's a negotiated settlement, that means Russia has to agree, and they're never going to agree to that, right? I mean, the criticism, I think, was fair in the sense that you might not want to say that out loud before negotiations, but I think he was also just pointing out the obvious. The other part is he's talking about conceding terrain. I think what he means is that right now they're recognizing militarily they're not going to be able to take it back. So if there's a freeze, I would call it ceding. So I think it could be better articulated if that's what he meant. But to be fair on both issues, it seems to me like he's just pointing out something that's just a fact. And perhaps he should not have said that before the negotiations, right? And then Vice President Vance did say that they would be willing to look at more significant sanctions against Russia, which we should all do. And then there's the other part, which we can get into, which is the discussion with our NATO partners on what they should be doing to enhance the security of all. But on Ukraine, I think, this is worth pursuing. But to your point, Dee, it definitely should include Ukraine, who, if they don't agree with this, all the rest is just irrelevant almost. I mean, if we're just going to come up with an agreement between us and Russia on the future of Ukraine, I mean, that would set an incredibly bad precedent. And we do have an example of that, and that is the withdrawal of Afghanistan, where we decided to not even include the government that we had had hoped would survive past the withdrawal in the discussions on the withdrawal. So it's not a perfect analogy, but it is evidence that you need to include the country who was the offended country, the one that was and in the discussions on any possible agreement, because there's only two countries that really are at the core of that agreement, Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. Man, I hope something happens where where it's equitable. Well, I mean, equitable for Ukraine, if I'm being honest. I mean, I don't give a shit about Russia.
No, we should
and frankly, like how Vice President Vance mentioned about sanctioning Russia, the fact that we don't have 100% as much pressure in terms of sanctions on Russia now, after 3 years of this war, is kind of crazy. It's crazy, and that goes back to the Biden administration too. It's like the piecemeal kind of effort that it takes. Like, sanctions. It's not money for us that we're giving up. Like, we're not giving money or equipment to Ukraine. It's really probably the one move that doesn't drain any of our coffers or anything like that, where people have a really big problem about. So it's kind of shocking to me that there aren't like max pressure sanctions on Russia at this point.
Yeah, and one of the ideas for helping support Ukraine is to use all these seized assets of Russia around the world, right? If there's enough, I think it should all go to Ukraine. But if we were going to get into the issue of making sure that there is some kind of payback for the support the U.S. gave, why not take the Russian seized assets?
Yeah,
right. I mean, I understand the idea of coming into agreement with key mineral rights in key metals in Ukraine, but we could also just take the Russian and basically we could just give it straight to them. Right? We don't need to take it. It should just go to Ukraine to defend the unlawful, unprovoked assault on their country by Russia. I mean, it seems to be that the world could look at this and it could be pretty quick to decide who's right and who's wrong, and how we can go about correcting that. But the number one thing is to maintain our support for Ukraine and to really push our European partners to do the same and potentially step up too.
I'm sure like the Europeans definitely don't put enough money into NATO, like where they don't hit their benchmark that they're supposed to, at least most of them. But like the European countries have definitely put up some equipment and money into Ukraine specifically, right? So like they've kind of stepped up with like getting like the major fallout, right? Like their energy prices are skyrocketing and stuff like that. They had to figure out a different way to get gas. And I mean, listen, understandably so, they should be paying that more or as much as the U.S. because it's their backyard, right? It's their neighbors, right, that are going at this. And what's next? If Russia was able to bulldoze through Ukraine in 2 weeks, who knows where else they'd be now, right? So,
they have. It's important to point out. I mean, I'm trying to look at the exact numbers right now, but I don't know if they're accurate. I think the U.S. is a little higher than Europe and the European Union, but they need to. It shouldn't always be the United States trying to get them to do what's right. Right? I know they say, "Well, that's us to you." Well, if we put more money into Ukraine than them, then I would argue that they need to match it at least.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Russia's right next to them. It's right next to them. And to your point, D, they haven't met most countries, I think, as of right now, and we could, chat GPT this to find out if we're right, have not met their obligation under the NATO treaty. I mean, countries like Poland are a model, right? They're over it.
Greece too.
All right. Let me some Greece. This shouldn't be the U.S. And this has not just been President Trump. This has been President Biden, every president, Obama, Bush, every president has said, step up, guys. You promised to get to 2% and you're not. And they shouldn't have to have this beaten over their head. They should do it because they obligated themselves to it, and it's in their own damn interest.
Yeah.
They should be going over 3%, 4%. They need to integrate the European military. They can't have, 30 different armies. We tried that for a long time, and, we figured out that was a terrible idea. They need to have an integrated ground, air, maritime military that is completely integrated and can fight as a cohesive unit and basically secure the bejesus instead of just relying on the United States. I think the United States should be a wholehearted leader in NATO. It's been the best military alliance in history, but that doesn't mean that all these countries haven't in many ways used the United States as their own security blanket without really contributing fully to the alliance. Both can be true.
Totally.
So going back to NATO as far as Ukraine joining, I wonder if they agreed to say, hey, we won't join, during the talks, and then later on, what would stop them from joining? And maybe that would be the pause that Russia needs to not come back into Ukraine. Like they say, okay, we won't join now, but not, agree to never joining, and then later on join, and maybe that would be enough now that they're in the fold to keep Russia from from future aggression.
It's a good point, Jay. So what I would say, it either is going to have a term, like within 10 years or something, or what they might want to do is say they won't join NATO unless they're attacked by Russia, in which case they'll immediately join NATO, right?
Yeah.
Because, ultimately, the reason for joining NATO is to get that security blanket, right? So if they have it, essentially, and there is a component of the Kellogg plan, which I'll call, by the way, General Kellogg, I'm coming to DC if you want to talk about this. Let me know. I'll be there next week. Happy to contribute where I can. But that might essentially do the same thing. Yeah. Like you don't need to be at NATO if you have the instant protection from the only one that's really a bad actor in that area, Russia, right? So, or you could even add Belarus or something like that as essentially a proxy for Russia. But that could be the case, Jay, or you could do it for 10 years or what have you. I don't think Ukraine should agree to never joining NATO.
Yeah, I don't either.
That's a bad
one. So General Kellogg's plan, in terms of for the demilitarized zone and stuff like that, that should be patrolled by either probably a European, hopefully a European army or military. Is there will for from European countries to do that? And is that something Russia's down with? Like having a NATO aligned European type of amalgamated countries put together running around in their backyard?
That's a good question, because what does that actually do? If you put that's one of the reasons why we need to do a lot of stuff closed door, vice, public discussions. Find out whether they're interested and willing to do this, because if not, then part of the plan, it's not going to work. If they are, and they go there, then if Russia violates it, they're attacking NATO.
Yeah.
Right? That's why you have a buffer zone. If you have German and French and, go down the list, soldiers there, and you attack them, you're attacking Germany and France, which means NATO, which means Article 5. So that's why I'm saying this could work, but I don't know the willingness of our European partners. They obviously should be included. I don't know if the article says that they're included in the Saudi talks. If not, that would be important.
Crazy.
And then obviously Ukraine needs to agree to any of this. Yeah. They should be there as a primary, for sure.
Hey guys, there's a new Team House merch store. You can come and check it out. The link is in the description. You can get Team House stickers, Team House patches, which are really cool and really well done, American made. Team House t-shirts, hoodies, mugs. Shout out to that one person that bought the Eyes On mug. Love you. Mouse pads, Camelback, tote bag. I don't know why we have the tote bag. I'm not a big tote bag guy. If you are, all the more power to you. But yeah, we got a ton of cool stuff. Stickers, American made. Patches, American made. T-shirts are also American made, but I don't fulfill them. I'm actually going to be the one shipping you the patches and the stickers. They're very cool. Check it out. The teamhouse-shop.fourthwall.com. That's a crazy URL. We'll change that, but don't worry. The link is in the description. Take a look. And in the show notes if you're listening to us on audio. We really appreciate it. And thanks for the continued support. I worry about, the U.S. and Russia having talks in Saudi with nobody, without the EU or NATO, other countries, and Ukraine specifically, and they just come out with deal points of and that becomes the narrative at that point. I don't know how that's productive.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I think it would just be an empty effort if they don't have Ukraine there and don't have the Europeans there to represent what they're willing or not willing to do, unless the components of the plan has changed. But I'm going off of I call it the Kellogg plan because he's the one that clearly articulated, but so did Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. So that's what I'm going after. I assume that's still the plan. I think it's a viable plan, but let's bring everybody together and see if we can make it work, because it's obviously something in everybody's interest to see a stop in the fighting.
So this is about 15 minutes ago. Donald Trump's special envoy, Keith Kellogg, says the European countries will not participate in peace talks about Ukraine. I mean,
all right, I don't understand that. I'm not a negotiator, so my background's obviously intel military, but can't see how excluding them, because we're asking them to support Ukraine. We're also asking, there's a component of this where there's a defense, like we'll come to their defense. I think the United States is talking about doing that via air. That's what I've seen in several places and what I've heard. I think the ground component of that defense is Europe. So, which also is dicey considering Europe is NATO. So obviously if we're rogering them up to pay more to Ukraine in their national treasure, B, patrol the buffer zone or the demilitarized zone, and C, be the ground component of a defense to Ukraine after the cessation of hostilities, seems like they should be there.
yeah, because who's going to run that? We're not going to go for U.S. troops there, right?
Yeah.
Like, no shot.
Well,
Yeah. Also, like Emmanuel Macron has just called an emergency EU summit in Paris for tomorrow. So it seems to be going great. What's going on?
Yeah, but to play both sides, it's time for Europe to step up. They need less summits, more action. They need to integrate their military. And I think Macron's actually the one advocating for that. So he might be saying, well, that's what I'm doing. But good, do it. It's in your interest. It's in the U.S. interest. And it's the last thing Russia wants to see. So that should put it on the top of your priority list.
What would it look like having to integrate, fucking 30 countries' militaries into one force, or at least have some subsection where everyone puts a little bit of like military power and people power basically into like a European force?
It would be one, they'd have to do a common language. They'd have to do common technology, communications, weapon systems that are compatible, integrated training, right? So if you're...
Which they do. I mean, most of these countries do train together, exercise-wise and all that, but never on a scale like this. They would never, so...
Exactly. So they basically need to look at us as a model, to be honest, and say, they did it. I mean, we used to have... militaries from every state. If you go back to World War I, right? The fight in 69th, as an Irish American, I think I've heard about that my entire life, right? It used to be just the army from New York, right? Or one of the regiments, I should say. Now it's part of the National Guard, but the army, the U.S. Army, is not state specific. Obviously, I don't need to tell you anybody in our audience this, but it is in a certain way that way in Europe. Right. And some of them are really good and some of them are really not. They're really not. And they need to standardize the training. If you're an infantry officer, you need to be an infantry officer for at the same standard and the same across the board, or a fighter pilot, all that stuff. And they need to have combined arms, integrated. They can see the model, which is us. I know I'm obviously biased, but and we can help them because it's in our interest. We should be over there helping them integrate, build a united Army component, air component, and maritime component, hopefully with a robust Marine Corps, because, if you're cool, you got to have a Marine Corps. But that should be one of the efforts of the United States. We can help them for sure. And they have to, of course, put the money behind the effort, which means well above 2%. Sorry, it's just a fact of life right now. They need to get that fact verified. All they got to do is look east.
Does the EU kind of look at NATO sort of kind of as that in some ways? Or am I off on that?
Yeah, they look at us as part of NATO. And
Right.
I think it's a fair criticism. They look at us and said, well, we got the biggest big brother on the block.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and spend money on something else. And, if Russia ever attacks us, they got to deal with the United States.
Yeah.
And that's what's rubbed many presidents, Democrat and Republican alike. It's just that the current President Trump, has been more vocal about it, and maybe not diplomatic in the sense that they're used to. But the fact still remain that many of them haven't met their obligations, and they need to go beyond it without being forced. They just need to do it.
And you would think that they would take the example of what's happening in Asia with Taiwan and China. Like, we still have not come out and said that we will 100% come to their defense if China invades. And so you'd think in Europe they'd be like, well, that could be us, so let's do what we're supposed to do.
Absolutely, Jay. And the other thing is, they can see there's big splits in our foreign policy between parties. That used to not be the case. So if you're China, if we were China right now, a communist party over there, we'd say, well, let's just wait until we get somebody who explicitly states they're not going to do anything if we invade Taiwan, and then invade Taiwan, right? So we need to have more consistency, but also our partners need to be, quite frankly, better partners and allies. Yeah. They should go into the game or the war wanting to be an equal partner in the success of the outcome, and not just basically hide behind the United States.
Because that helps them in the end anyway. If and when this thing is over, it helps you at the negotiating table to say, we did our part. We put up our money, we put up our equipment and our men and women. So now we have an equal say in what's said, rather than, no, we did it, US. We are the ones that did it. So now we're going to tell you what you're going to do, which is basically what's happening right now.
Right. Yeah. Good point. It might be, from Russia's perspective, they only feel like they need to talk to the United States. Right. So I think we should make sure they're included, but they should also make sure they're included. And one of that is like, hey, we got a lot to say in this because, we have a substantial stake in it, which they do. We don't even know if they're agreed to serve as this observation force in the demilitarized zone. I haven't seen that. Maybe I missed it, but I mean, we've seen a lot of comments about them criticizing the vice president's speech, but I haven't seen a lot of comments specifically from European leaders. And maybe we'll hear today because of this conference that President Macron's calling. But it'd be really good to hear more from them about what their plans are to contribute to this peace agreement.
Yeah, you would think something like that would leak, after they get upset about what Vance said. Something like that would leak to be like, hey, we are actually pretty serious and we should be in part of the negotiations and stuff like that. At least I'm thinking like optics wise and PR wise, instead of like complaining.
Yeah. I would hope we're doing a lot more behind the scenes discussions, and then we have our stuff in one sock before we go in and talk to the Russians. And if Ukraine and Europe is all right for the United States representing them, I doubt it, but if they are, okay. But we need to get our stuff in, so we know what we're willing to do and not do, and what Ukraine's willing to give up, because ultimately they should be the ones deciding the future of their country, or not. It seems clear to me, or we might get into a point where we have these long discussions and then we go back to them and Europe says, well, we're not going to the militarized zone, and Ukraine says we're not conceding any territory, period. And then the United States can decide, here's the thing, if we're going to take this on as just US and Russia, and then we stop supporting Ukraine, the US lost the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right.
The US lost the war in Ukraine. Right. So we got to also view it that way. We're not impartial, mediators here. We are taking on the responsibility to be the counterpoint to Russia. And if we seize funding, which it gets a lot of support on both sides of the aisle, especially in the Senate, we're the ones that lost to Russia and conceded to Russia, which would not be morally right. It would not be in our national security interest ever, and it would put us back substantially, and it would essentially tell Russia, okay, that was a good idea. Let's see if we can go on to another country, maybe a NATO country, maybe another non-NATO country first that we're not going to be willing to defend, and then starts the land grab. It's already going on.
Yeah. We got some other breaking news too. You guys want to hear it? This is good news, I guess, from Charles Lister, who's been on the show. Check out that episode. Yeah, Syria's interim government, GSS, has captured senior ISIS commander Abu al-Harith al-Iraqi in a targeted raid. His capture is linked to U.S. intel sharing with Damascus.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, yes, and I would put a plug for Charles while I recommend him coming on our show. If you want to really know what's going on in Syria, he's a good person to listen to. I think he just got back from there because I'm on a policy board with him. So that's obviously good whenever an ISIS leader is caught. It's interesting about the intelligence sharing, if that's accurate. I don't know that we're already sharing intel. I think it's probably the case, and it might be a test. Right? Have they really split from the jihadist roots?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's tell them where jihadist number 4 is and see if they apprehend him, right?
Yeah.
And then, so I'm speculation, or I don't know, or I wouldn't say it. That could be the case. It could be one to see if the government of Jalani or Ahmed, it depends on how you view them, of what you call them, is really what they say they are.
So Jalani is his jihadi
El
name?
El Shara is his real name. His name before was Jalani as a jihadist.
Gotcha.
So if you hear people talking and they call him Jalani, they don't believe he's a reformist. If they do, then at least they think potentially.
More from Charles Lister. When in Damascus, I was told of 8 ISIS plots that have been foiled by Syria's internal ministry, GSS force, since January 1st. All tied directly or indirectly to U.S. intel tip-offs.
Good. If true, that sounds good. Now the question for us is whether we withdraw our forces. Our support to the SDF, I think, has been one of the bigger successes of the global war on terror. We're still calling it that. Period. I mean, we don't have that many forces out there. We have some conventional. We have, obviously some intel folks and some special operations folks, and the SDF is doing most of the heavy lifting and fighting, and unfortunately, the dying. But they have defeated ISIS, and they have kept it from returning with a very small footprint of the United States. In my opinion, it's been one of the successes that we've had, in a model in many ways of how to conduct proxy force operations. So hats off to especially the Army special operations component, and my former colleagues and Jason's former colleagues in the agency for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I don't remember his good guy name, but Jalani really wants those sanctions taken away. You know what I mean? Like, he's playing ball, which is good.
Yep.
Good for Syria too.
Ahmed al-Shara.
Al-Shara.
His real name. So the big thing on sanctions, I was just talking to a friend who's a mutual friend of the guy that was referred to as Caesar. Caesar was, I think he was an intel officer. I've met him several times, but he's the one that testified in Congress with a balaclava on and a hoodie, because he smuggled all these pictures of just this horrible torture that the Assad regime was committing. So that led to the Caesar sanctions, which was against the Assad regime. So obviously you can make a good case for those to go away, because Assad's, sitting in Moscow right now. So, and then the question is other sanctions that might be on HTS, designation as a terrorist organization. When do they fall off? And I think people are reviewing it now, see if he's if he is what he says he is, and if he's willing to have elections, and he's willing to be inclusive in his government in Syria, which includes all parts of Syria, or it'll just be a fragmented country and a rump state of Damascus as it. I mean, that wouldn't be good for the region. It wouldn't be good for the Syrian people. So hopefully he is what he says he is, and we can work with him, and we can get Syria as a place focused on enhancing the life of their people and not allowing Russia and Iran and all that to use it as a launch pad against our friends in the region.
Did you see that interview he did with the rest of his politics guys? By any chance, Mick?
You got talking about Al-Shara?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple. Is there one specific?
Yeah, he did like a longer form, probably 45-minute interview with the rest of his politics guy, the Rory Campbell and
you're talking
Alistair
about
Campbell and Rory. Yeah.
I don't know that I saw that.
I mean, he came off pretty, trying to say the right things, kind of, more statesman-y rather than jihadi and stuff. But I mean, you're trying to be the president, right? So, I mean, you're not going to come out and be like, death to America and Israel, right? That's like not something you say out of the gate.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, he's saying the right things, so we shouldn't criticize him for saying the right things, right?
Absolutely.
He comes from a very educated background. Actually.
Yeah, upper middle class.
A lot of physicians and political figures in his. So he wasn't completely self-made. He which is not criticizing. He knows how to play that part, and that's good. That's good because that's what people want to see and what they want to hear, and more importantly, want to see played out.
Yeah. Listen, I can understand people's apprehension, right? Like this is a guy who we imprisoned in Iraq, and he joined Al-Qaeda in Iraq and stuff like that. So it's very interesting, like looking at the global war on terror 20 plus years later. And it's like the people that we really wanted to go after and take out are shaping up to be like people we're trying to do business with. I mean, that's just the way of the world and stuff. It's just interesting. It's interesting is what I could see.
Yeah. It's like the Operation Paperclip right after the World War II. We were killing Nazis, and next thing you know, a couple of years later, we're throwing them a lab coat on them saying, hey, help us build these rockets. You know? So I'm not saying it's right or I necessarily agree with it. I'm just saying it's just sometimes you work with the people that you really don't like the most,
Yeah, that's true. That's part of the way the world is. If we excluded everybody that we disagreed with, we would exclude a lot of our current partners.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, let's be blunt. And all that would do is hand them over to our adversaries.
Yep. Right.
Exactly. So I certainly, like to use Saudi, for example, I certainly understand, obviously, the criticism of, many of their actions in the past and their human rights record. But ultimately, if the United States says, okay, we're not going to talk to them anymore because we don't like the human rights record, then we're just opening the door for China and Russia. And you could just take that down the road. Doesn't mean we should, not promote our values of individual rights and human rights and all that. But we just have to be realistic that if we stand on that to a point of excluding talking to people in the world, that it's probably not going to be not only to not our benefit, not to the benefits of the very ideals we propose. Because if they don't have any influence in the United States and it's just Russia, I mean, believe me, they wouldn't be getting any lectures on human rights. Not to pick on Saudi, but any of these countries that aren't in the same Freedom House standing as we are.
Last bit, going to Israel and Iran. There's been reports that Israel's spinning up to eventually hit Iran's nuclear program and probably try and take it out completely. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
You want to start, Jay? You want me to?
No, I'm going to let you. This is your.
All right. Yeah, this is something I spent a lot of time talking about. So, I mean, the issue is this. They have realized from an Iranian point of view, right? So I think it's always better to look at everybody's point of view. Doesn't mean you have to agree to it. They have seen their proxies get decimated. So Hezbollah has been substantially degraded. Well done by the Mossad and obviously the IDF. And they've seen Hamas, who, no matter how you look at this, has taken a substantial defeat in Gaza. The Houthis, we could do a lot more there, but they certainly have taken a big hit on the proxies. Their exchange between Iran and Israel has shown that Iran has no real teeth there, right? They launched, 100 bottle rockets at them, and they've shot down 99% of them. So missiles, rockets, all that stuff. Some landed, but not effective. Israel responds and takes out almost the entirety of their air and missile defense system. So I think from the Iranian regime perspective, which is only really cares about the Iranian regime, they're like, wow, we really cannot match Israel, period, and let alone if the U.S. is on their side. So our only way forward to protect the regime is nuclear weapons. They can look at North Korea as an example, vice Libya, under Gaddafi as the flip side of that example.
Yeah.
Give them up, and you've got presidential love letters coming, or you're dead in a ditch, literally, or keep them and brag about them, and you got presidential love letters coming your way. So we have to look at it that perspective. They are close to 60%, according to the IAEA. The issue with that is getting to 90% is really quick, which is weapons grade uranium. From there, they have to come up with the apparatus that actually detonates that weapons grade uranium. And I'm told that from reading, not from classified stuff, that could be between 7 months to like 14 months, right? So unless somebody gives it to them, then all bets are off, right? They have to have a way to deliver it, but that delivery can be multiple means, not just ballistic missiles. So as this intel comes out to those that get it, they're going to know how close they are. And then Israel, when they think they're too close, they're going to ask for the U.S. to participate because that'll increase the chances of success. If we won't, they certainly will ask for the munitions that are necessary, these massive ordnance penetrators that can go a couple hundred feet in the ground before they detonate, and then just to actually have an effect on a subterranean nuclear facility from us. And if we provide it, we essentially might as well be part of it to make sure it's successful. So it's a very real possibility. I think it's a very real possibility that Israel will not accept a nuclear-armed Iran. They'll think that's an existential threat that they can't accept. And that Iran thinks they have to get to that point to maintain their grip on power. So we have two diametrically opposed views coming here that could lead to an actual strike. And whether the United States gets involved or not, we'll see.
Okay.
The hell am I supposed to add to that? No, that was perfect. I mean, I agree though that both of them are at that point where it's like Israel is saying there ain't no way, and Iran is saying, well, we have to. It's like we have to go buy that gun to keep the bully off our, doorstep. Although I'm not necessarily calling Israel a bully, but they both feel, if like as Mick has pointed out, if you look at it from both their points of view, they don't have a choice. And I know that the U.S. has a part to play in this, whether that's providing munitions or participating, but I don't even think Israel, in my humble opinion, that they would even wait for that. They would go with whatever they had. If the U.S. hemmed and hawed and it was like, oh shit, they're about to use this on us, they're just going to go with what they got.
I think that's a fair point. I think if we say something like we don't want to participate, where you might not be successful if we don't, they'd say, well, we'll see.
Yeah.
It's very
See you on the
Israeli.
other side.
Yeah.
We'll see. So, and you look at it, like they did some strikes in Yemen, right, where they had to basically use the same package, the air package that they would do if they did. You could argue about whether those aircraft are capable of carrying the munitions necessary, but the actual air side of it, it was further to strike Hudaydah, for example, in Yemen than it would be to Natanz in Iran. At least it's comparable. So I think they have been preparing this to be done, and it would likely lead with suppression of the air defense if they manage to get any back, and serious strikes on the facility. And we'll have to see. Iran sees this coming. They just recently said, if you do this, we'll just rebuild them. Okay, that's okay. And then they'll strike them again. Yeah. So I think they understand that this could happen. That's why they're saying it, and that it could be successful if they're acknowledging that they would have to rebuild it.
Yeah. And thinking about what you were just saying, Mick, and I probably should know this because I'm an airplane geek. Israel doesn't have any long-range bombers, do they?
I don't think so. And there's certain this is public, but I think it's the 84. I'm looking it up right now. MK84 MOP. Let me see if that's it.
That's the bomb, right?
Yeah. The MK-84 no, there's a bigger one.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
going to say
MOP,
MK-84 is pretty.
Massive Ordnance
Yeah.
Penetrator, is
Yep.
a 30,000-pound bomb.
Yeah. I don't know that they have anything that can carry that.
Yeah.
That's just me thinking off the cut. I don't think so.
It'd be,
Oh, well,
you know,
maybe they've been pitched out of C-130s, I think, right? I
I don't
believe
know.
so.
So, I mean, I'm a ground maritime guy. So
Yeah.
if folks are listening to us, if this gets closer, I mean, if there's
Alex.
one
Yeah,
of
we'll
our
get Alex.
airports, okay, all right.
We'll get
Yeah.
Alex Hollings on. He
I'm
knows the
pretty
deal.
positive we pushed one out of a C-130, AC-130 in the beginning stages of Enduring Freedom, I think. And I know Israel has C-130, so that's the only thing I can think
yeah.
of.
Yeah, we might end up with it's 57 GBU 57.
Mm.
Is the 30,000 pound
Bunker buster.
Yep, it's B2 B52 is what this this
Oh,
happens.
geez. Yeah, they definitely don't have those.
No.
So we should, and again, we should have an Air Force expert on here to help.
Yeah.
But in order to use those type of aircraft, you really got to suppress the hell out of some.
Yeah, which they do have the means to do that. It's just, carrying the big boy in is the issue. I'll do it. They pay me enough. I'll carry it on my back.
Yeah, I mean, so how do they get it delivered? Besides, maybe like Jay said,
I don't know.
Or we
they don't
do
have
it.
those munitions either.
Yeah,
they do have some pretty significant munitions, and I just saw that we approved more.
Mm-hmm.
But those are more around they're not anywhere near the 30,000.
I think the Biden administration was holding back on some stuff, and then when Trump's admin came in, they okayed the bigger stuff, but not the big boy.
Yeah,
right. The MK-57 is what it is.
Yeah, no, if it does happen, definitely we'll get Alex Hollings on from Air Power at Sandbox News to break it all down, because he's encyclopedic knowledge of what's what with aviation, and it's pretty impressive. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting next few months. I'll say that. So guys, maybe make sure you stay tuned to Eyes On for every breaking news story.
That's right.
Anything else, guys?
Yeah. What you mentioned the other day something about some Eyes On swag. What is it? Coffee cups? Is that what it is?
Yeah. So we just started a new Team House Eyes On merch store, which the link is in the description if you're interested. And we have Eyes On mugs. I'm going to get Eyes On t-shirts and hoodies too on the store soon. So yeah, somebody bought the Eyes On mug, so shout out.
Right on.
Hopefully they're not pissing in it.
I guess another thing to look for in the near future is when the effort to cut out fraud, waste, and abuse hits the DoD like this. Yeah. We all know it's going to be like, holy moly. So, and I'm all about cutting fraud, waste, and abuse out of the government, right? But I think we're going to see a lot of room for improvement. Not with the uniform folks. I mean, the uniform folks, I think, are very frugal and actually, do more than most companies to make sure they're not blowing stuff. But the overall industry itself, I think, we'll wait to see. But I think there'll be stuff to talk about there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to be skeptical because I feel like their first move is going to be to get rid of folks rather than look into like procurement stuff. And like, maybe we don't need 17 different 6th generation fighter programs or something, like maybe 4 is good instead of 16, and I hope that doesn't happen, to be honest.
I think the savings is going to come from the programs.
I hope you're right.
They save much in personnel, to be frank. Yeah. They're going to save a lot on programs. And most of those, for the folks that aren't familiar, oftentimes the military is just told, like, you're going to have this because it benefits, 15 different states, and the senators agreed, and you're going to have it whether you want it or not. So that's why I'm saying and I'm biased, obviously, but I'm saying most of the issues in my experience have not been with the uniform military, which is what most people think of when they think of the military. It has been programs that are forced on, the Navy and the Air Force, particularly, that are very expensive because they benefit people in the United States. I get the point, but it's probably where most of the savings are going to come up. Duplicative programs that are outdated, programs that can be, I think it's called Assassin's Mates, the Chinese concept. Let them build a $5 billion, whatever, and we'll find $100,000 whatever to kill it, right? We need to be leading this by the war fighters and by the war planners of the future, not just what is something we already do, or even if it benefits states. We need to ultimately end up with the most effective military, the most lethal military in the world, not just a jobs program.
Agreed.
Yeah, totally. All right, guys, all the links are in the description. Fogbow, Longbow, new sweet hoodies from Fogbow that are not available. Sorry. Not yet, anyway. Jason Lyons' links are all in the description as well. Andy Milburn, When the Tempest Gathers, his great book is in the description. And the best way to support the show, if you don't want to buy the merch, is patreon.com/theteamhouse. And yeah, this is great. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
gents. Thanks, everybody.
Great rest of your day. Great rest of your weekend.